high precision and low shrinkage. Cleaner edges, higher sharpness, and more delicate details. Formulated to showcase super fine detail in full 8K resolutions. Flawlessly sharp. Wargamer doesn't make 3D prints, it makes products. Let's find out. When I first saw a resin advertised as an 8K resin, my bullshit detector started ringing. I always assumed print quality to be a function of the machine, the LCD resolution and pixel density, how many microns in the X and Y axis a printer can be accurate down to. But if resin choice really does have an impact on the quality of the detail reproduced in the print, is it even visible to the naked eye? Or is it insignificant to the point that any resin claiming to be a high detail resin for miniatures is essentially just marketing BS trying to get you to spend more than you need to? Let's get to the bottom of this. I've got here 4 different resins to make the case for high detail. The first is Elegoo 8K, which comes in at $29.99 US a kilo. Next up, we got another 8K resin. This one's from Frozen and is their Aqua 8K, which is $39.99 a kilo. Then it's Haygear's PAP 10 Precise Detail Resin at $59 US. And finally from Yes That's 3D Printed, in partnership with Fohammer, we've got Wargamer, which comes in at $59.99 US. All 4 of these resins are being marketed to us as sharp, high-detailed resins, perfect for the tabletop hobby. But yeah, are these really more detailed than other resins? Let's grab some budget-friendly options, and ones that tout other properties as their main selling point. Things like fast and durable, and we'll see how these stack up against our high-detail lineup. First up, we've got Sunlu ABS-like resin for $28.99 a kilo. This stuff puts durability at the heart of its messaging, touting good bending and toughness performance. Then for something simple and bereft of big claims, it's Anycubic Standard, coming in at $29 a kilo. We'll also include Creality's Fast Resin. This one is just $15.99 a kilo, and its big claim is in the name, and that is its alleged suitability to printing quickly. And finally, let's throw in Z-Mud General Purpose Resin by Uniz. This stuff has gathered a bit of a reputation for itself as a rather rubbish resin, so this should be an interesting one. Now, when it comes to the marketing, basically every resin here makes the same claims at one point or another in their sales pitch, that they're durable, stable, low odor, precise, blah, blah, blah. So the way we're going to approach this is as follows. I'm going to tune each resin to dimensional accuracy using a couple of different calibration parts to ensure consistency across each different resin. I'm then going to print the same models in each resin. I will then prime each model with the same base coat. And this is important because the resins will look different due to their differing pigments. And so we want to rule that out and make sure that they are all reflecting light in the exact same way. I will then set up each model under identical lighting conditions at a fixed location from the camera and take high-resolution photos, which we will then scrutinize together. Also for fun, I will throw in some less scientific bend tests and give you my take on each resin's durability, and furthermore, I'll rank the smelliness of each resin too. And you know what? Just for fun, let's do a taste test also. Yeah, that's not bad. Ooh. Notes of battery acid and acrylic. Okay, pretty good. This one is bitey, very intense, almost unpalatable. And dare I say, slightly pleasant on the aftertaste with a note of shepherd's pie. Lovely.
Sir,
Oh, sorry?
this is not the way to become one with the machines.
It isn't. Let's get started. This is the Hallett Mage S, the latest and not so greatest from Creality, a completely lackluster upgrade over last year's model, sporting a 14K LCD upgrade and none of the innovation that we're seeing from other manufacturers. I should have a whole first impressions video up on this already, and you can check that out here afterwards if you like. But basically, I want to use this printer for this video since it's already here on the bench, And I kind of want to really drive home a point here for Creality that they need to build exposure calibration tools into their printers.
That's a really good suggestion, and I think this is not something
Honestly,
really hard to do.
Build it into your slicer Hallet box, and make it so we can choose the starting time, say like 1.1,
Yeah.
and then choose the increment,
Yeah.
0.25, 0.5, 0.1, whatever. And you guys will have the best exposure range finding feature that will just instantly destroy everyone else.
That's me about 6 months ago telling some reps from Creality in person what they can do to make their machines better than the rest in the coming generation. And let's just say none of my feedback was integrated. But yeah, go watch that video for more on that. I don't want to dwell too long here on my immeasurable disappointment for this new printer. Let's get printing. I began by prepping my calibration print. I'm using the new Cones V3 Beta, which you can find on the Table Flip Foundry Discord server. This has some really nice new and fun features that help you dial in your resin for dimensional accuracy, if you choose. But I also threw in part of Amerilab's Town here, as I like to reference the little checkerbox pattern on the front when it comes to dimensional accuracy. And hopefully between these two parts, I can quickly and easily identify when I have achieved said dimensional accuracy for each different resin. I really wish this printer had an exposure calibrating function built in like most Anycubic machines do, and now more recently the new Elegoo machines that are starting to ship with it, because for each resin I have to run back-to-back prints of these calibration parts until I finally can hone in on that right setting. Not being able to dial in a resin in a single or at most 2 prints because of this is extremely time consuming, and also it's kind of wasteful because of all the extra gloves and shit you gotta use each time. Anyway, thankfully I was able to achieve dimensional accuracy with the Sunlu ABS-like resin in 3 calibration prints, at which point it's time to now print our comparison models. Now, since this is a channel all about miniatures made on 3D printers, I think the most realistic test that we can conduct here is going to be comparing actual miniatures side by side. So what I'm going to use here is some minis from this channel's members welcome pack, which have been generously donated by the talented artists Artificers Mini and Dow Miniatures. There's a bunch of other great rewards in there as well if you want to help make these videos, but more on that a little later. From Artificers Mini, we're going to be using these 2 excellent and highly detailed Dwarven models, Fimbly, Son of Gimler, and Titan Hill Beast Hunter. And from Dow Miniatures, we have something a little bit more grimdark and hard surface, the Thunder Recon Ranger. I did spend a bit of time hunting around looking for other potential models to throw in here, and something pretty cool about Frozen's XP Finder caught my eye. In each corner, they've put a different texture: cloth, weapon, reptile, and jewelry. And I reckon this is going to be perfect. I don't need the whole part though, so I quickly edited this thing, and between 3D Builder and Blender, made it more compact and convenient for our purposes. Now all that's left to do is slice these models up and send it. Our first print turned out beautiful, and the models popped off the supports nicely. To make sure all the prints in this video are as clean as they possibly could be before painting, I ran a 2-stage wash, 1 dirty to remove the bulk of the resin, and 1 clean with fresh spirits to give the final polish. After assembling the minis, I stored them away in a small bin, labeled it to keep track, and moved on to the next resin. This time around, I chose Haygear's PAP10 high precision resin and repeated the same calibration prints to locate the exposure value that closest gets us to dimensional accuracy. And once I had that, I again printed our test models at that new exposure value. One saving grace of this printer is you can modify the print settings here on the printer and spare yourself having to slice it again every single time. Small favors, am I right? And once again, we have a beautiful print with all our minis looking flawless. I put them through the double wash, popped them off the supports, put them together, and cataloged them away in a new bin for later. So if you're at this point growing tired of me recounting my process and bringing you along on this little project with me, you can actually just skip to right here and see the comparisons between all the different results. For everyone else though, here's where this project starts to get difficult. Uniz Z-Mode. This resin really lived up to its reputation for being horrible to work with. It kept giving me bad adhesion issues with my Amerilab's Town model, which failed to hold on time after time. I of course kept upping my bottom exposure layer, but then that kept failing even as high as 70 seconds. I then resorted to giving the build plate a good scuffing with sandpaper, at which point that did finally solve the issue. And after figuring out my exposure value, I once again run off the test models, put them through the double wash, and with the minis in hand, they look good, and the supports came away nicely, But I couldn't help but notice this resin does seem to be a little on the brittle side, with those rafts snapping almost effortlessly. Anyway, let's go another red one. Frozen Aqua 8K. Now, this resin really tested my fucking patience, and in my frustration, I neglected to record any of this, but I did go fishing through the bin afterwards, so I can show you some of those failures here. Like Z-Mud, it also refused to stick to the build plate, but it was also delaminating where the layers would completely fail to adhere to one another. The ambient temperature was over 25 degrees C, so my suspicion is the issue lays with the speed at which I'm trying to print. So I do have this Hallet printer set to its Dynax mode, which is basically a balls-to-the-wall speed mode. And my hope was I could get through this video quicker, especially all those back-to-back calibration prints, by taking advantage of it. But I guess not. So at this point, I face a bit of a dilemma. I could disable Dynax, and maybe then this resin will work. But then, to be safe, I would have to go back and recalibrate and reprint all the other resins that I've already completed up to this point, because I want the printing variables to remain as consistent as possible for our comparison. Even though there likely is no difference in print quality with Dynax on versus Dynax off, we don't know, and this video is not here to test that. And so I think for my own sanity and for the consistency of our testing, I will start over from scratch, but I'm going to have to swap out the Hallet and bring in something that has the right tools for the job. Enter the Anycubic Mono M5S Pro. This printer has a lot of great things going for it, but one of its best features is Anycubic's Resin Exposure Rangefinding feature, or RERF, RERF for short, which should let me dial in each resin in as little as one print. Before we do that though, I wanted to modify our calibration parts just to be a bit more organized and convenient by combining them on the same raft, as well as labeling them 1 through 8 to help keep track. I then brought my new part into Photon Workshop, where I quickly realized I made it too big, so I jumped back into Blender to remedy that, at which point I now had the right size, but forgot the correct layout for RERF, so I then referenced my own tutorial to jog my memory, link down below, and check that out. Isn't that so fucking cool? I love RERF, and I can't wait to play with Elegoo's take on this. Come on, Creality, time to catch up. So here we are back at square one again with Sunlu ABS-like. And after I popped all these parts off the build plate, I gave them a quick rinse in the dirty wash to get them mostly clean before inspecting them for dimensional accuracy. And as I hoped, I was able to lock in this resin's exposure value in a single calibration print. So quick, so easy. Thank you, Anycubic. Now, let's get the test models printed up again, and I'll now fly through the remainder of the resins, calibrations, and prints with an epic montage, and I'll meet you back here shortly with the results. So things went pretty smooth with the M5S Pro, thankfully. I did again struggle with Frozen's Aqua 8K resin. It does seem to be extra sensitive to drops in temperature, as this print ran overnight. And as you can see, it's showing some pretty clear signs of delamination here, like on this base, or this gun that's just straight up missing its top half. I worked around this by getting that Anycubic blower heater installed, and I gotta say, top marks for this thing, honestly, and I'm so stoked to finally have cold enough weather that I could test it out for myself, and I'm really glad to see it working well and doing what it's supposed to do. Now I can confidently recommend these blower style heaters. Did you know Chitubox sells one? Anyway, let's tuck into the results. As we begin here, I'd like to invite you to join the Once in a Six-Side community on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. I don't know if you noticed, but I did not jam a sponsorship into this video for some random company that you probably don't even give a shit about anyway, and I can only do that because of the direct support from audience members like yourself. You don't get nothing for your money though. We have a vibrant and welcoming Discord community and an absolute bounty of STL files for your tabletop hobby. We're talking terrain, bases, miniatures, 75mm figures, tanks, mecha. It's insanely good value. And it's thanks to these generous artists and their contributions that I can offer this much cool stuff for your support. Arcane Whiskers, Artificers Mini, Cross Lancers, Dow Miniatures, DM Stash, Dungeons and Dreadnoughts, Imp 3D Sion, Moid, Ravenbones Minis, Steam Tatsu, Stoneforge, Synergy Studio, and Tractor Minis. So please follow the links below to buy me a coffee or Patreon, whichever has the least friction for you, and join me in bringing these videos to life. And don't forget to check out the work of these contributing artists, whose links you can find down there also. So with the help of our new AI overlords, I've put together a simple little web app here that's going to let us easily compare these results side by side, as well as A/B test them back and forth. I'll leave a link down below where you can grab this and all the photos in their original high definition quality as they were straight out of camera, and you too can poke around these results and draw your own conclusions, which, if you have the time, I'd love to hear about down in the comments. So let's get the least interesting discovery out of the way first, and that's the raw appearance, the unprimed finish for each of these resins, which, of course, is wildly different. Lighter resins like Creality Fast and Anycubic Standard have difficult to read details, but also resins with a glossy or satin finish appear less detailed when you put them next to more matte or darker resins like Frozen 8K and Elegoo 8K. Without any paint, these resins really do look sharper, but here's where things get interesting. When we reduce them all to the same surface finish under a coat of paint, what we now find is any differences between these resins almost completely disappears. Now there is a difference, and some truth to these claims of sharper and crispier detail, but what's interesting is where we see those differences manifest. So when you compare any of the miniatures side by side, as far as I could see, as well as the folks on the Discord who also scrutinized these results ahead of this video's release, the differences here are extremely minor, and nothing so significant that any of the so-called high detail resins have justified their purchase over any other. And what's fascinating is, some resins where we expected to see crispier detail based on the marketing, Hagear's PAP 10 and Wargamer, we actually see slightly softer detail when we compare it against, say, Elegoo 8K for example, or even plain old Anycubic Standard. And Creality Fast seems to hold its weight against the so-called high detail resins as well. So maybe the additives that make resins more durable are trading off a tiny bit of detailed crispiness, which tracks with the experiences people typically have with high detail resins, that they tend to be on the brittle side. Where you can see the differences the clearest, I think, is on the texture test. In particular, the top right texture. You can clearly see how some resins like Uniz and Sunlu appear overexposed despite tuning them to dimensional accuracy. And actually, what's fascinating here about this Uniz result, and I think hints at why so many people have struggled with it, is if you look at the bottom left corner, we have inconsistent exposure, where this small little patch here appears way overexposed compared to everything else around it. I first thought that this might be a hotspot from the UV light source, but since it's absent on the other 7 resins in this same location, I think, and this is purely speculation, that what we see here is a poor distribution of the photo initiators, and that's despite making sure each resin was mixed thoroughly for these tests. What do you reckon? Now, if it's of interest to you, here are the final exposure times that I arrived at for each different resin when tuned to dimensional accuracy on the Mono M5S Pro. The two most interesting outliers here are Frozen and Uniz, with Frozen needing only a single second per layer, and Uniz incredibly needing as high as 5 seconds. I did calibrate each resin with a 1/4 second resolution, as that's what Anycubic's RERF gives you, and in my experience is a perfectly practical and useful interval for determining an exposure setting. Does that mean we could be less than a 1/4 second over or underexposed on any of these results? Yes, however, I would argue that that margin of error is functionally meaningless and not true to life of how these resins are typically calibrated and consumed in everyday use cases like our tabletop hobby. Also, if you've ever had the experience of straining your eyeballs looking at 2 calibration prints that are 1/10 of a second apart in exposure, you know there's no discernible difference. So I think a 1/4 second resolution here is more than enough, and yeah, as I said, completely practical. I think it's also worth talking here about my experience looking at all these test models in person, directly with my own fleshy eyeballs and not through these images taken with a camera and then blown up on screen like this. And that experience is that I can't bloody tell the difference between any of them, other than the little texture tests if I squint really hard. If you handed me any two and asked me to tell you which is the sharper one, I could not confidently give you an answer. So my conclusion is that you should shop for resin for your tabletop minis based on other factors like your budget and durability, and don't feel like you're missing out by not going for that 8K or 14K resin. My God, because resins that are being sold to us as high detail resins, I feel pretty confident now calling that out as marketing bullshit. I think what these resins really are selling you is a nice matte finish that makes the details easy to read when unprimed. So if you plan to play with unprimed armies, then hey, maybe buy the Elegoo 8K. That one I thought looked the best straight out of the printer. But yeah, otherwise, shop smarter, get something cheaper and more durable. Sunlu ABS-like, for example, really stands out to me from this particular lineup for its bendiness and affordability. And as you've seen when painted up, looks as good as any other. Speaking of bendiness, the only two resins from this lineup that exhibited any durability worth a damn on the battlefield of our minis was Sunlu ABS-like and Wargamer. Literally every other resin here broke easily, with Uniz, Anycubic, and Heygears being the most brittle, followed by Elegoo, Creality, and Frozen, which resisted this little torture test slightly more before also failing. And finally, both Sunlu ABS-like and Wargamer were both undefeated by this test and will happily just bend before slipping free every single time, both showing very similar suitability for use in our hobby. It's actually kind of remarkable just how similar these two resins are. Like, they're almost the exact same shade of dark grey, they're both as durable as one another, they've also both got a bit of a shiny finish, especially Wargamer, which the company Yes That's 3D Printed actually say is a selling point for this resin, but I'll leave that one up to you. I personally think a matte finish like the Elegoo 8K resin has is far more flattering to a miniature's detail. But anyway, these resins aren't exactly alike, and I have identified at least two reasons why you should buy Wargamer over Sunlu ABS-like. Now, obviously, Wargamer as a product is directly connected to my fellow YouTube content creator, Fohammer, whom if you're watching this, you no doubt also watch or at least have seen or are aware of his videos. I've recommended his channel here in the past for his resin printer reviews, as he seems to give honest impressions, and he covers a lot more printers than I've been able to. So reason number one to buy Wargamer would be to support a content creator whose work you value. Making a living creating free videos online is an incredibly tough gig. There are no guaranteed earnings, and so every dollar feels extremely hard-earned and precious. So if you love Fo's videos and he's helped you pick a good printer, then maybe take a look at picking up a bottle of this stuff to say thanks for all his hard work. So the other reason that you might want to buy this resin over the Sunlu ABS-like is if you want a decent water washable resin that can take a beating and you're willing to pay top dollar for it. I did try this out and it worked great, so there's that. But yeah, otherwise, I'd say just save your cash and buy yourself the Sunlu or any of the other affordable ABS-like resins out there that have good durability. Elegoo ABS-like 2.0 is great, and I've heard good things about 3.0 as well. You're not limited for options when it comes to resins, that's for sure, and I hope this video has maybe eased the burden of choosing just a little bit by removing that variable of detail crispiness from the equation. If it's a resin print, it's sharp as fuck, regardless of what you choose. All of these resins were reasonably low odor, but I would rate Anycubic and Frozen's as the most unpleasant, closely followed by Elegoo 8K and Wargamer, with the rest barely registering any smell at all. Keep in mind, this is extremely subjective, and I'm the kind of person who thinks the smell of gas at the Bowser smells great when I'm filling up my car. So yeah, finally, and perhaps the most interesting detail of all, is the minor print failures that can be observed on the Anycubic, Frozen, and Creality test prints, suggesting that these are not good resins for miniatures when tuned to dimensional accuracy. But that's the topic for another video. Thanks for watching. This was a shitload of work, so I'm gonna go curl up and die now. Till next time. Patreon.com/OneCenter6side. Great Discord, epic models. Okay, thanks, bye. Oh my god, I almost forgot. Big thank you to miniaturehorde.com for hooking me up with the Wargamer resin. My fellow Aussies, this is a hobby supply shop here in Australia, I believe based in Victoria. And they've also sent me this, which is like a magnetic army transport thing, which has a really cool tray in the bottom. There you go, so you can see that's like a steel sheet with a couple of handles on it. Very cool. And then there's a magnet, so when you're magnetizing your minis, you can keep track of polarity. And as you can see, there's the
receiving magnet in the bottom there. So yeah, that's cool. Thank you, Miniature Horde. Oh, and on the topic of Wargamer, it was brought to my attention that the company behind this, Yes, That's 3D Printed, is actually refusing to issue review units to other YouTubers, which I thought was very interesting. Obviously, I got this through Miniature Horde, who are unaffiliated with Wargamer. Obviously, I can't personally speak to that because I haven't tried to get this directly from Yes, That's 3D Printed. But you got to check out this channel, Noisy Works. Like, just look at the absolutely insane testing that this guy does with resin. It's great. So yeah, go check out Noisy Works. And to Yes, That's 3D Printed, send this guy some of your resin. How could you not want to see your resin participate in these awesome tests? And any other YouTubers as well who want to look at that. I mean, like, you're directly affiliated with a content creator here on YouTube who's, specifically doing reviews. So it makes sense that this stuff should be sent out and reviews be made of it. But anyway, I hope my review here today of this has been helpful. Go check out Noisy Works, check out Miniature Horde, and check out my Patreon. Cheers.